Pain relief. Choose Nurofen Quicksorb.
This Saturday with Sportsbet, get the best payout across all three tabs with top-toed exotics. Nail a quinella, trifecta or even the quaddie and you'll get the biggest return. Top-toed exotics from Sportsbet.
Karen and Derek are in love with bees. You see, they just love beekeeping, not horse riding.
Hello, Michael Usher here in the 7 Newsroom. We're about to go to the Prime Minister. You can see on the screen there, standing by to hear from him. Obviously a very important meeting this morning of the National Cabinet. 3 big new stages with restrictions lifting. Let's go straight to our 7 News political editor, Mark Riley in Canberra. Mark, we've got a little bit of word on what might be happening. What are you hearing?
Yeah, well, the Premiers and the Prime Minister met today, Michael, to map out the 3 particular stages, be stepping up. Groups of 10 allowed outside the home, 5 visitors in the first stage. Restaurants and cafes, so there's a big push for them to open up in that first stage as well, which is a little bit of a surprise. Playgrounds, boot camps and so forth, but larger gatherings in the second phase. The Prime Minister's coming to the podium now to tell us exactly what those stages are. Here's the Prime Minister.
Always being thankful is a common lesson our mothers advise us, and I've always found that particularly good advice from my mum, especially if you're going through difficult times. It turns your focus on others who are not so advantaged as yourself. And we've been doing a lot of that lately, I'm sure. So many Australians are hurting right now. Lives turned upside down, painful separation from their loved ones. Livelihoods that they've spent a lifetime building, stripped away. Uncertainty about their futures and their family's future. The last few months have given us a reminder of the things that are really important. Our health, our well-being, a strong health system, and all those who keep it strong. A growing economy, our jobs and our incomes that rely on it. We cannot take this for granted. Every job matters, whatever job you do. Every job is essential. Our children's education, caring for our elderly, respecting their dignity, the selfless and humble service of so many Australians who just get on with it every day. Make this great country work. We have seen these heroes in action. Above all, the importance of each other. That every Australian matters, every life, every job, every future. And we've learnt some important lessons. That we can meet the tests as we have and the challenges that we've so far confronted. That when we have to, we can and we do pull together. That we can focus on something bigger than just ourselves. Be encouraged, Australia, that we are successfully making our way through this difficult battle on 2 fronts. And we're certainly doing it better than many and most around the world today. Firstly, we've been fighting the virus and we are winning. Secondly, we have put in place and are delivering the economic lifeline through JobKeeper and JobSeeker and many other programs to get us through the worst of this, to buy Australians time as we fight the virus and we chart our way back. Thirdly, and particularly today, we move ahead with reopening our economy and our society with a clear plan and a clear framework that shows Australians the road ahead. The next step beyond this will be to build the confidence and momentum that will see our economy get back up and running and get Australians back up on their feet and moving ahead with confidence. And then we can reset our economy for growth in the years ahead, in this new environment, so we can deliver the jobs, guarantee the essential services that Australians rely on, keep Australians safe and take care of this amazing country that we have the great responsibility of looking after. This is the plan we are working through to get through this together, as we promised. So today our focus is on the road back. Today we have put in Australia in a position to go forward. We have strengthened our health system and put the protections in place. On the front line, our testing and our tracing capabilities containing outbreaks, all backed up by a health system with more ICU beds and ventilators, more personal protective equipment, doctors, nurses, first responders ready to go, JobKeeper and JobSeeker in place. So with that work being done, today National Cabinet agreed a three-step plan and a national framework to achieve a COVID-safe economy and society. And it is our goal to move through all of these steps to achieve that COVID-safe economy in July of this year. In this plan, we walk before we run. We know we need to be careful to preserve our gains, but we also know that if we wish to reclaim the ground that we have lost, we cannot be too timid. There will be risks, there will be challenges, there will be outbreaks, there will be more cases, there will be setbacks. Not everything will go to plan. There will be inconsistencies. States will and must move at their own pace and will cut and paste out of this plan to suit their local circumstances. There will undoubtedly be some human error. No one is perfect. Everyone is doing their best. To think or expect otherwise, I think, would be very unrealistic. This is a complex and very uncertain environment. But we cannot allow our fear of going backwards from stopping us from going forwards. The Chief Medical Officer, Professor Murphy, will go into the plan in more detail. But this is the plan for a COVID-safe Australia. 3 steps, moved at the pace of states and territories, that will get us back where we need to be as quickly as we can. A plan that, according to Treasury, can see some 850,000 jobs restored in the months ahead. Step 1 will enable greater connection with friends and family, allowing gatherings of up to 10 people and 5 guests in your own home. Working from home if it works for you and your employer. That's a difference in emphasis, as I'm sure you've picked up. It will see children back in classrooms and in playgrounds in their communities. Golfers back on the green. Lap swimmers back in the pool. Boot camps back in the parks. Retail and small cafes and restaurants reopening. Intrastate recreational travel starting again. It will see easing of restrictions for funerals with up to 30 attendees outdoors and 10 at weddings. Step 2 will allow larger size gatherings of up to 20 people, including for venues such as cinemas and galleries, more retail openings on sector-based COVID-safe plans, organised community sport, and beauty parlours, and you'll be pleased to know bar classes open once again. Step 3, allowing gatherings of up to 100 people. This will become clearer as we move through the first 2 steps. So there will be more work to do on step 3. But most workers by then will be back in the workplace. Interstate travel will likely resume. Pubs and clubs with some restrictions will be open, and also possibly gaming venues. As I said, step 3, but also step 2, will get greater definition as we move through the success of step 1. And as I said, it is our aspiration, as agreed amongst premiers and chief ministers and myself, that in July we will have moved through these 3 steps across the country. The pace, though, will totally be up to the states and territories. They will be responsible for setting their own timetable and communicating that to their citizens and residents in their own states and territories. Premiers and chief ministers have asked me to stress that there should be no expectation of step one starting on day one, unless they are indeed already there. Moving on these steps will take some preparation. It is also important to note that movement from one step to the next will depend on three criteria that we have always outlined and indeed has enabled us to move today a week earlier than we had planned. Those criteria, again, that the medical evidence suggests that further easing would not present an undue risk, that widespread testing is adequately identifying community transmission, and thirdly, public health actions are able to trace cases and trap local outbreaks. Testing, tracing, trapping, as they were saying in the Northern Territory recently. Downloading the COVID Safe app, which is now over 5.3 million, is the best way you can help us do this job, to keep you and your families safe. And I'd say that especially now, because for some time now, Australians have been kept at home. And they know who they've been seeing each and every day now for some time. But that's going to change in the weeks ahead. You will be seeing more people. You will be connecting with more people. And so the COVID Safe app will be even more important to protect you and your family and your safety, and for those in your community, those you work with, those you come in contact with. So I would encourage you to continue to download the COVID Safe app. For industry and businesses, it's all about getting your COVID Safe plans in place for your workplaces and your premises. And Safe Work Australia has been doing some excellent work there, and I referred to that earlier this week with Nev Power and the Minister for Industrial Relations, Christian Porter. So that's the plan for taking us forward. We'll be reviewing progress of our plan every 3 weeks and making any changes as we need to. I again want to thank all the Premiers and Chief Ministers for the spirit in which they've engaged in this process over the last several months. I also want to thank our expert medical and economic advisors, and of course Professor Murphy, who is here with us today, as always, and to you, Brendan, and to all of your team. Thank you for the excellent work that you have all done. I also want to thank my own team, from our own government, the Deputy Prime Minister, Michael McCormack, the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, and the Minister for Health, of course, Greg Hunt, and all of my colleagues for getting us to where we are today. But we've still got a long way to go. We've got a plan to get there, done the work to get there. Australians have done the work to get where we are, and I want to thank them most of all for enabling us to get to this point. A year ago, I made a promise to all Australians that we would work each and every day to keep our economy strong, to keep Australians safe, and to keep Australians together. We're keeping that promise to Australians. That's the fight we've been in. That's the fight we remain in. It's the fight we're winning, and it's the fight we'll continue to win together. Brendan.
Thank you, PM. I might just go through the PowerPoint. So we'll go to that first slide. And this is, again, you're familiar with this slide. It's showing where we are with our flat curve. You will see some little spike in numbers in the last few days. Most of that, 50% of the cases in the last week, are related to 2 outbreaks. The new March aged care outbreak in New South Wales. What we expect to see and what we will continue to see, and that's not such a concern if we're getting on top and managing these outbreaks as we have in those 2 cases. So despite, other than those 2 cases, we've got very low case numbers, but the virus is still there, it's still in our community, and that's why, despite our very good position, we've got to be very cautious and wary with our next steps. Some very good news on testing, where testing is really ramped up across the whole country. We've done more than 730,000 tests. We're just shy of 6,900 cases at the moment. 6 out of 8 states have had multiple days of 0 cases, but they all know that that doesn't mean the virus isn't still in their community, and all of us have to be very careful as we move forward. Next slide. This just demonstrates some of the measures we've taken over the period of this outbreak. You can see the progressive impact of the border measures and the various social distancing measures that we put in place, and how they have brought the curve and case numbers down, and now it's time to look at those measures. We're not looking at the border measures. As we have said on many occasions, 2/3 of the cases in Australia have been from returning travellers. We're not going to relax any of our border measures soon, and we're going to continue to quarantine all returning travellers because this virus is certainly in a much worse position in many other countries from which our citizens are returning. I'll go to the next slide, thanks. So this is, as the Prime Minister outlined, our three-step process. Step one is cautious. It's gentle. It's not doing too much at once because we are in uncharted territories. There are not many countries in a position to start gently relaxing measures with such low case numbers, and we don't want to lose the control we've got. We want to make sure that outbreaks that occur are managed and controlled. We also want to make sure that before we do anything, every Australian follows these measures. Everyone continues to practice that physical distancing all the time. Good hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene. Everybody stays home when they're unwell. No matter how mild your cold or your cough, stay home when you're unwell and please get a COVID test. That's the best way we will find these hidden cases of the virus in our community, is if every single person who has any respiratory symptoms gets a COVID test and stays home. No more heroics of coming to work with a cough and a cold and a sore throat. That's off the agenda for every Australian for the foreseeable future. Please. The COVID-safe plans for the workplaces are really important, as the Prime Minister said. Clearly also there's the health response. Prime Minister's already alluded to that, testing, tracking and responding to outbreaks. So in step one, it's essentially getting people in groups of 10 together, outdoors particularly, working at home if it's going all right for you and your employer. Allowing 10 people in a one person per 4 square metre distance in small cafes and restaurants. We know that that will mean many cafes and restaurants won't be able to open, but many that are doing takeaway may well want to put up enough distant tables to start just gently serving 10 people at a time. Some libraries and community centres, again, with only small numbers of people. In step two, we're looking at larger gatherings of around 20. Potentially in some states they may look in some venues at really good COVID-safe plans to go more than that. Opening a range of other things such as gyms, indoor fitness, beauty therapy, cinemas, galleries and the like. Some interstate travel we think might reoccur in that stage. Step three is much more relaxed, and this, as the Prime Minister said, there's still a lot of work to be done on step three. There's still quite a bit of work to be done on step two. We have more certainty around the definition of step one, and each of the states and territories will be separately defining how and when they will implement that. But in step three, we're talking about opening up most of the economy, but again, in a COVID-safe way, with strict distancing, strict hygiene, all of those measures that we have to live with whilst this virus is with us in the community. Next slide. This just provides a little bit more detail and really gives a bit of a narrative around each of the steps. So very cautious early reopening in stage one. Step two, many more businesses and activities and venues opening again, but still with significant numbers controlled. And step three, a much more broader opening, but again in that principle of good distancing and good hygiene. And in step three, we're hopeful that there will be more travel around the country and we might start to get some domestic tourism again. But step one, well defined. Step two, a bit more work to be done, and step three, still a lot of discussion to be had before we can well define that properly. Next slide. So what are we asking the community to do? Keep those personal responsibilities. I know I've said it already today, but please keep that distancing. battle that we've won so well so far. You only have to look at the nightly news and see what's happening in really good countries with good health systems like Australia, where they let this virus get out of control, unfortunately. We've been lucky to control this virus, and we want to keep that control. So while we relax some of these measures cautiously, every Australian has to do their bit. Every Australian has to do the things that I've said already about distancing and good health and staying at home when well. We'll continue to do all of the things as a public health response, and we will make sure that if we find outbreaks, as we surely will, we'll get on top of them and control them. If we all do the right thing together, we can get through the next few months and gradually get a COVID-safe normal life again. Thanks, Prime Minister.
Thanks, Brendan. I might start over this side today. There's quite a few more of you. You're a bit bunched up today, I'm noticing.
Yes, you better distance a bit.
Thank you.
Have any of the states or territories indicated when they're likely to start step one? And also, just on the NRL, would you support a no jab, no play policy?
Well, first of all, on the issue of premiers, they'll be out announcing their own timetables for when they'll be making those statements, and I think you can expect to see some of them later today making some initial comments, and I'd expect to see them making further comments over the days ahead, over the weekend and into early next week. And so that's when you can expect them to be outlining those timetables. I'd note, as I'm sure Brendan would also, that when you look at those three steps, I mean, there are some states like Western Australia where step one is pretty much tick the box. They're very much well advanced on that. South Australia, Northern Territory quite similarly, but those on the East Coast are a very different situation. So they've all got different starting points, but the important point is the whole country has the same end point, and that is to get to a COVID-safe economy. And as I noted the other day, as the then Minister for Social Services, who started No Jab, No Play, I obviously had a lot of sympathy for that, as opposed to, at that time, vaccination of children in childcare centres. Now, ultimately, the states and territories have to determine what their health requirements are as they apply to the NRL, and if they were to be insisting on that, then I would think that was entirely reasonable. Tim.
Prime Minister, you say Treasury has advised you 850,000 jobs restored in the months ahead. When does it say those jobs will be restored? How many will be left unrestored by your calculations on the current employment rate? And is this the snapback that you envisaged when you put JobKeeper in place?
Well, a lot's happened since then, Tim, as you'd know. And I think we've got a lot more information now than we had back then. What was important back then is we knew that Australians would need an economic lifeline, and that's why, firstly, JobSeeker and the effective doubling of JobSeeker and JobKeeper were then put in place to provide that lifeline. Now, since then, we've seen a lot of changes in the global economy and how other countries are dealing with this. Those 850,000 jobs, I'm advised by Treasury, that includes those who may be on JobKeeper now or on JobSeeker. It's people who've been stood down, going back into their full employment, and that work has been done based on the steps that you can see here today. So it's very much a function of how and when all of those steps are completed. And, well, that's the aspiration, Tim, but as we've learnt during the course of this COVID crisis, there are a lot of uncertainties. And so that is what we understand to be the value of doing this. We've got 1 million people and more who are now on JobSeeker, and that's been a Herculean task by those at the Services Australia and Centrelink to get all of those claims processed in that period of time. And I want to see everyone get back into work, Tim, and that's why the plan that I set out, not just in relation to the opening up of our economy, but ultimately the reset that we'll need to do on a policy level. That is what's going to drive the jobs and make them sustainable in the future. That's what's going to guarantee the essentials on hospital and education funding and disability care and aged care. That all requires a strong economy, and that's why those subsequent policy measures, building on a lot of the reforms we've already put in place before we came into the COVID crisis, that's what's going to drive that jobs growth into the future. But as I set out at the beginning, Australia has had a record run on economic growth, and I'd always said, both as a Treasurer and as a Prime Minister, that we could never take that for granted. Any number of things can disrupt that, and we've seen that happen. And so we can never be complacent about the things we need to do to grow our economy and generate jobs. David.
Cool. So I'm not actually sure if you said that in the press conference, but it's been reported that you want to have businesses, 80% of businesses, fully operational by that July cutoff. Is that the case?
I don't know what you're referring to.
Okay. Well, what percentage?
No, I haven't given such a statement.
Okay. What percentage, or do you know what percentage at the moment of businesses are closed or running at half capacity or anything like that? Just so we know kind of what we're going from and towards.
I don't have an estimate of that in front of me. All what we have seen is the reductions in employment. That's known. What we have seen is the reduction in the incomes people are taking home. And we've been able to get through Treasury some early runs on some of that data, and the Treasury can speak more to that. But whichever way you look at this, the economic impact has been very harsh. Today, the Reserve Bankers have set out their various scenarios, and they've got an average scenario there. I'm pleased that average scenario is a little better than the one they were talking about not that long ago. And I suppose that goes to Tim's point. Things change. And look, I'm hopeful that we can put this plan in place. And that's why what follows this plan is building the confidence. We've got to get Australians to get their confidence back, and they have every reason to get their confidence back, because there are very few countries in the world that can stand here today and outline a plan like this because of where we've got ourselves to. There are a few, and I've been having discussions with some of them very recently, but we're a small group at the moment, and I hope that group gets a lot larger. Sam, did you have one before I wanted to move around? You've deferred to the press gallery president.
Thank you all. PM, two questions if I may. The first on Cedar Meats, which is the big breakout concern here. Do you have any concerns about the way that's being managed, and does it actually make the case for a slower easing in Victoria? And the second question is about those state border controls. Business complains about those, they restrict business. Do you think that those state border controls have to be eased in the first step here, urgently?
Well, let me say, firstly, on Cedar Meats, we're going to have outbreaks. They are going to occur. Where people have the COVID Safe app, it helps our health officials actually deal with the outbreaks, and that would have sped things up had all of that been fully operational, and they would have all been in place. Now, I can tell you that that will have occurred by the end of today, and the code is also being released later today, I'm advised, on the COVID Safe app. I commend Premier Andrews for the way that he has sought to address this issue. These outbreaks are difficult, but you've got to move quickly and use the tools you've got available to you. Outbreaks are not a reason to slow things down. Outbreaks are going to happen. All premiers and chief ministers understand that. And so it's how you respond to them. And I think in this case, I mean, not all information is perfect when you go into them, how long they've been going on, not always clear. That's why I think some of these automated tools are very helpful to the premiers and the health ministers in those jurisdictions. So each one of these is going to be tough, but it's not a reason to slow things down. It's a reason to ensure you've got the COVID Safe app download, that you've got workplace practices, COVID Safe premise practices, workplace practices, which is what is sitting at the foundation of the plan we've set out today. Brenda, did you want anything on that?
Yeah, so this virus, as we know, is incredibly infectious. We've seen from one wedding 35 people infected in one. So it's not surprising that when you get an outbreak in a workplace such as this, it will spread significantly. The important thing is not the size of the outbreak, the important thing is the response. And the response is testing everybody, every contact, locking the place down, closing it down, quarantining and isolating. All of those things have been done, and I'm very confident that that outbreak is under control.
A lot of the stimulus will be scalable. You're now opening the economy a lot faster than people thought. Is all of that stimulus locked in? JobKeeper, the end date's obviously in the legislation, but is there any stimulus that you might need to wind back?
Well, there's another payment that will be made in July, which is a repeat of the $750 payment that was made just a few weeks ago. And that's factored in as a next phase of stimulus which is going through to beneficiaries. The JobKeeper and the JobSeeker program, as you note, have a legislative life, which was set out over a 6-month time frame. And you're right, Sam, I said it was scalable. And what our objective is to ensure that we grow the economy and we get people back into jobs, and we make sure that people are being supported by the economy, not the taxpayer, as quickly as possible. There was a review built into JobKeeper to be done before the end of June, and Treasury will be doing that, and they've been doing a lot of work on that just over the last week or so. So, look, we'll take that one step at a time, but I need to stress again that that was a temporary lifeline put in place to help Australians through the worst of this crisis. It comes at a very significant cost, not just to current but future generations as well. And it'll be there to get us to meet that objective, but it is not envisaged, never was, to be a longer-term arrangement. Yeah, Michelle?
The economy obviously won't be completely opened up until you're able to open the borders. Is it a fair assumption, leaving aside New Zealand, that the borders will not be open before next year? And when you do, are you attracted to a stage process? For example, I noticed Nev Power said the other day there'd be maybe a good idea to have charter flights of overseas students. You're all attracted to that sort of approach?
A couple of things, and I'll pick up David's question as well, which I didn't answer the second part of that. On the internal interstate travel and the border issues that are there, they have never been part of the national baselines. That has never been a recommendation. And they have been decisions that have been taken unilaterally by those states. I'm not making judgments about them one way or the other, and they'll decide those. I did see data, though, that the Treasurer shared with me, I think he shared with you the other day, which showed that the freight travel, which is being done by road and other forms, was actually holding up despite those border restrictions. And that was welcome. Of course, the recreational transport and those sorts of things has come down significantly, and that includes air freight. But the road freight and the land-based freight transport, goods are getting through. Goods are moving around the country, and I understand there's a whole bunch of kegs on their way to Darwin as we speak, running up the highway. Much eagerly anticipated, I'm sure, there for next week sometime. So that is occurring. In relation to the borders, international borders, we've spoken about New Zealand, as you've already noted. Issues of international students, you'll note that it does come into the third step of the plan, and that is a possibility. And how you would work that through, well, that'd have to be carefully tested. So we are open to that, and we would be working with institutions to see how that could be achieved. But it has to be done according to those strict quarantine restrictions and how that's done and how those costs are met. And so there's a lot of steps to work through. But, I mean, we're open to everything pretty much to get the Australian economy back and firing again as much as possible. We've just got to step through it carefully. Yeah, Vladimir?
So the numbers of people under each step, so 10 and 20 and 100, does that include parents and children? So, or could you have 10 adults and 10 children in one gathering under step 1? And given that the states can make their own decisions about precisely what particular things open up when they want, how was the list decided today? So how was it decided that playgrounds would definitely be in step 1 on the list that you've shown us all today, and the various other measures?
I think I'll let Brendan take that.
So there was a process where all the states and territories fed in what they thought was safe to do at each stage. So in terms of, it's 10 people. I mean, it's whilst we acknowledge that children don't transmit as often, we've got to keep it simple. We want to keep only 5 people visiting in your household or 10 people in a gathering outside. So it's 10 people training in a football field. It's 10 people getting together in a park, again, hopefully with distancing. So we got together and we looked at what was like a consensus position. Not every state agrees with every step, but we look at the relative risk of each thing. So there's an absolute risk about gathering size. So that's a protection, so that if things do break out, if we've only got gatherings of 10, that means much less potential for transmission. And so some states, though, don't want to open cafes and restaurants initially, and because they feel that their situation, they would prefer to take some time. Playgrounds, for example, the evidence is really accumulating internationally that most transmission is occurring indoors. we now know that every citizen is following good hygiene practices. As long as you only have 10 people at a playground and as long as the parents bring along sanitiser and wipes, people are changing their behaviour. So the feeling was that the risk for playgrounds is now lower, the risk for small gatherings is lower. There is necessarily an arbitrariness about this, and in step one, there are things that could have been included that weren't, on the basis that we want to keep it gentle and careful. Step one is tentative baby steps into normalisation. If everything goes well, we don't have big outbreaks, step two could be more confident.
Right on back.
Prime Minister, the Federal Health Department decided to take no punitive action against a Sydney council that told its staff downloading the COVID Safe app was compulsory on their work phones. Why should Australians trust the government to enforce those privacy protections when a sunbather on the beach got a on-the-spot fine and an employer who breached the Biosecurity Act got basically no consequences?
Well, I'll have a chat to the Health Minister about that. Look, the vast majority of the enforcement arrangements on all of these measures are actually followed through by state and territory authorities, and if anything, there's been criticism of how thorough they've been. And so, in relation to the specific matter you've raised, I'd have to be briefed on that in terms of what the specific circumstances were and the actions that were or weren't taken by the department, and I can follow that up with them. Ellen, are you good?
Yes, please. In terms of the task of rebuilding confidence, given the scale of unemployment that's come as a result of this, how do you rebuild that confidence? And would you look at bringing forward government spending on infrastructure and major projects?
Well, we already have. That's something we're already doing. That's part of the plan now. And whether it's in Victoria or New South Wales, Western Australia or anywhere else, we've already got a very large infrastructure program. We went through the process of bringing many of those projects forwards at the last quarter of 2019. And as I've reported previously, we're making pretty good progress on that. And now that we've been able to get through these issues in reopening the economy, which I think is one of the key issues for confidence. I mean, the reason you've got 3 steps here, we could have released just 1 step today, given that steps 2 and 3 still have more definition to go into them. But it's important that gyms know their next cab off the rank. It's important that people know that pubs and clubs are in step 3. They need to know that because they need to prepare for it, and they need to know where we're going to go next and where the states and territories are going to follow. And that's why the states and territories' timetables are also so important. That's what builds confidence. Having COVID-safe work and premises plans builds confidence, because I understand Australians, having been at home for several months, may be a bit cautious as they venture out again. And so they need to be confident when they're going into a restaurant or a cafe or doing things like that, or going to a playground or whatever it happens to be, that the plans are in place, that people are taking that action. That lifts public confidence in health, which means they're more active economically, and this is what has the flow on. Now, I don't think anyone could suggest that the Commonwealth hasn't turned up when it comes to providing the economic supports at this time. I mean, it's unprecedented, and that is on top of, the almost $9 billion of extra support we've put into the health system, and of course the $100 billion that has been rolling out for infrastructure around the country. So you're right, Ellen, it's got to be a part of that economic plan, always has been, and we're already acting on it. Yep.
Mr. You mentioned earlier that there will be outbreaks. You say that there will be clusters. Is it a case that the states, the territories and Australians will need to hold their nerve once they go down this path and not snap back to tighten restrictions?
Yes.
And can I ask you on stage 1, for the stage 1 restrictions, do students need to be back in the classroom at schools?
Well, that's what step 1 is. And for the vast majority of states and territories, that's exactly where they're heading. And that advice has been consistent from when this COVID crisis first began. There's been no change. So I'm looking forward to seeing children back in classrooms learning. That's the best place for them to get an education. But on the other point, yes, I think it is important that we all hold our nerve. That's why I was saying before, these are cautious first steps, but important first steps. You can stay under the doona forever, and you'll never face any danger. But we've got to get out from under the doona at some time, and if not now, then when? I'm coming around.
Could I ask a little bit more about how that 3-week review process will work? And also, just picking up on Michelle's question, can you give a rough time frame for when you think we might see general international travel allowed again?
I can't see that happening anytime soon. There is nothing on our radar which would see us opening up international travel in the foreseeable future. There are already some very, very minor exceptions where the Border Force can provide an exemption for outbound travel, but that's in areas like facilitating development aid in third countries and things like that. It's a very limited set of circumstances. I've already mentioned in my answer to Michelle how we could potentially consider how things for international students might work, but these are exceptions, not the rule. It is something that other countries are discussing, but by and large, almost without exception, I'm not aware of any countries that are looking at that option at this point. And Greece, I know, is considering that coming into their summer. They mentioned that at the meeting we had last night. But it sounds, that they're still working through that issue. And I wish them well with it. Yeah.
Businesses needing certainty, but can you give the 5 million people on JobKeeper and all those on JobSeeker with the Corona supplement the certainty that they'll get that for at least the 6 months?
I give them the certainty that I want them to be back in their jobs where they don't need it. That's what we want. I mean, people don't want to be on JobKeeper and JobSeeker. They want to be in a job that's paying them. And that's what this plan is about. Not to keep people on income support from the taxpayer, but to have a wage that's provided by a business that's successful and earning again and going forward and creating a strong economy. That's what the Lifeline's for, to get people to that point. That's what we're aiming towards. So we've got Brett. I'm going to come around. We're just moving right around. Okay.
Professor Murphy, I'm sure your best PowerPoint presentation yet. Australians appreciating this clarity around where things are headed. One question to you: where do pubs and clubs sit on the steps? We can't see them on there. And then, Prime Minister, just continuing the road analogy, you talk about not letting the fear of going backwards stop us from going forwards. Do you envisage a point where we might need to make a U-turn on some of these steps, or is it a case that we just keep powering through regardless of what happens if there are outbreaks or things escalate beyond what you might envisage happening?
So I'll start with seated restaurants in pubs and clubs, like in other venues, can, if the states and territories choose to implement in stage 1, they could start with 10 people. They may well not. For a pub and club, that would be a pretty small restaurant. Similarly, in step 2, they can still do seated dining. The general view is that, with the exception of the Northern Territory, which is moving forward more quickly, that it will be level 3 before bars and nightclub type venues without seated dining would be open, and gaming type venues. But as the Prime Minister has said, there's still a lot more work to be done in that space.
Step 3.
Yeah.
And just on U-turns going backwards, is it a case that, the journey might stop momentarily, we won't revert back steps?
Oh, that's certainly the intention. I mean, I said the other day, it's like the emu and the kangaroo. They go forward, not backwards. And that's how this has to work. Premiers and Chief Ministers are very keen to ensure that you continue to move forward. And but look, it's a level of confidence is building on this, and that's what I think this first step also enables us to carefully look at how that step is going. The question was about how often we're reviewing. Well, that's every 3 weeks, and basically we'll go around the grounds of the Premiers and the Chief Ministers and ask them how it's going. There'll be some empirical evidence about how that's tracking. We'll have the health data, but we'll also have the economic data, and that will help guide. I mean, they're not formal reviews. They're just, I'd describe it more as stock takes as to where the framework is at, and looking where all the states are, and how we're going towards our ultimate aspiration of being there in July. Okay, Kath.
You must have, you say outbreaks aren't a reason to slow things down, and all the momentum is forward, and the Premiers are on board with that. But it's just a point of common sense that at a certain point of outbreak, I mean, God forbid, but let's say we get some really substantial outbreaks following the restrictions. You're not actually saying, are you, that we will just continue to power forward?
I'm saying we'll act on the health advice, Catherine. That's what we'll always do. And all of these steps, the the key requirement as you move from one to the next is it's subject to the health advice. We've always acted on the basis of the expert advice, and if the expert health advice that, God forbid, we're in a situation like you outline, then we would have to take the health advice in those circumstances. But this is why we're so keen to stress, and I don't know if we can go back to that second last slide about what Australians can do. That scenario you talk about is so much less likely if the COVID Safe app is downloaded, if people are following the distancing practices and the hand hygiene, and if workplaces and premises have effective COVID Safe plans for those operations. That's what protects you. It's not about whether there are cases, as Brendan has said, it's about the response. And if the response is effective, well, then we don't find ourselves in the situation you're talking about. But in those circumstances, the health advice, you can be assured, would play heavily in the decisions of premiers.
Is there actually a threshold? Because there are thresholds for
going forward. No, it's based on the case. It's case specific. It's case specific at the time.
Prime Minister, on community sport last week, you raised expectations that we could see a return to the soccer pitch for kids. It's not on that step. What step does community sport fall into? And how soon do you think we could see kids back playing sport?
Well, that's up to the states and territories. They'll have to outline their plans. But what you can see, I think, now under step one, should the states move on that in their jurisdictions, that training would be able to occur for those types of sports. That can be happening under step one, and in many places that would already be happening. Step two involves community sport. That's right, isn't it, Brendan?
Yes, so step two has sport in groups of 20, and again, more work will be done that may well be possible for some competition to occur then, but full level C of the AAS framework will be in step three. Step two is still being worked through, but in step one, people can train in groups of 10 according to the AAS level B, and we want that to happen.
And it involves, and it doesn't have to be organised sport, but step one, with 10 people in a park having a kick of a ball around with soccer on a Sunday afternoon, that's what step one envisages.
Correct.
Yep, Phil?
In the economic forecasts the Treasury's put on the step 1, 2, 3, the job creation, does that supersede the estimates put out an hour ago, a couple of hours ago by the RBA? They're still forecasting unemployment at 9% at Christmas, 8.5% next June. So are these figures subsequent to what the RBA is saying? And if that's the case, could this take the edge off the economic forecast the RBA has just released? Could they not be as bad?
Well, they weren't done as part of the same exercise. I mean, the RBA and Treasury are different organisations, as you know, so they've been prepared independently of what RBA has been doing. There's a lot of dialogue that goes on between the RBA and Treasury, but the RBA has set out 3 scenarios there. They've got a median case. It's a median case scenario, but all I know is the more we open up, the more people go back into jobs, and the better everyone else will be. And the numbers will then tell the story, whatever those numbers happen to be. At the moment, I don't like what those numbers are at all. As all the premiers, affirmed again today, success is not being able to stand up every day and say there's 3 cases or 12 cases or 18 cases. Not when you've got 1 million people out of work. That's not success. And so they're the estimates Treasury have done, and this plan takes us a long way back, but not all the way back. Yes.
PM, your early access to super scheme has been frozen because of alleged identity fraud. Were there enough protections built in? How can Australians have confidence their details won't be stolen? And Professor Murphy, do you believe NRL players should be allowed to play without receiving a flu shot, and how significant is that health risk?
Well, do you want to do that one first, Brendan?
So I think that's really a matter for the relevant state health authorities. I think, I personally have a view that everyone should get a flu shot, and it's important but I think that's a matter for the relevant state.
Yeah. Look, over 10 billion has been claimed and has been moved through that system and that program. We've had this incident, and it's been moved on quickly, as you'd expect. When people undertake fraud, then there's a response to fraud. I mean, fraud is possible in any program, anywhere. Over my government experience, I've been in immigration, I've been in social services, and I've been in Treasury, and I can tell you, fraudsters try and have a crack at every single one of those systems every single day. So the fact that people have tried to have a crack at this doesn't surprise me, and the Home Affairs Minister has already, I understand, made some comments on this. I mean, it's a serious fraud issue, and that's why the precaution was taken to pause that for at least 24 hours while that's being addressed. The fact that there has been such a swift response, I think, demonstrates that there are protections in place and action is taken, and they should find them, they should lock them up.
Prime Minister, this week the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo seems to have stepped back from his previous assertion that there was enormous evidence for the Wuhan labs theory. Do you welcome the shift in emphasis from your US allies, and to what extent has this focus on that theory made it harder for you to gain international support for your inquiry?
Well, first of all, in terms of Secretary Pompeo, I want to extend my best wishes to him and his family. He's just lost his father, and know from recent experience how difficult that must be. He's an extraordinary fellow, and I'm sure his father would have been incredibly proud of him. So all my best to you, Mike. I've already made comment on these matters. I think what is important is we find out. And the world doesn't yet know. I raised this at the meeting with international colleagues last night. The Health Minister continues to do that through his forums. It's not directed at anyone. We just want to know what happened so it doesn't happen again. It's a pretty honest question with an honest intent and an honest motive, and I'm seeing more and more support for that position. And we're supporting a European motion that's going to the World Health Assembly. There's an independent oversight committee of the Health Emergencies Program within the World Health Organisation, and on top of that there's a health regulations review process that's going on that I think can accommodate the recommendations made by the Europeans as a good first step to getting down this path, but you can't let the trail go cold. And I think Australia and the United States and the United Kingdom and countries all around the world would like to know what happened, because we don't want to see it happen again. Yeah. We'll go here and then we'll finish up with you.
PM, what's the role of business in the return of confidence? When should they restore pay cuts to staff and start paying their rent again?
As businesses are able to reopen and get on their feet, then I'm looking forward, as I'm sure they are, to getting staff back on the floor, lifting their wages again from their stand-down arrangements, and to be able to take that enterprise forward again. One of the things I'm very hopeful of is that because of the supports we put in place, the arrangements that the states and territories supported under the Commercial Tenancies Code, was it basically allowed businesses to go through this incredibly difficult time with the loss of trade and not have the businesses collapse. Now, there will be some, sadly, who will have collapsed. But there are so many more that I think, as a result of the supports and protections we put in place and the good-mindedness and the fair-mindedness of whether it's landlords, tenants, banks. I mean, as the Treasurer, I think, indicated, between $120 and $160 billion of loans have had their payments deferred as a result of the banks. And I want to thank Matt Comyn and all the team. He leads the Australian Bankers Association, of course, CommBank. They've engaged. I mean, I've given them a bit of a hard time from here and now, including from this podium not that long ago, but they responded well to it, and I thank them for doing that. So I think all of this, people have worked together, which means, people can get back up to their hours. People can get back up to what they were doing before. That's the whole point. That's what we're trying to do here. But it's not easy. It's one thing for things to be shut down. That can be done relatively quickly. It's terribly painful. But building it back up again and getting the confidence of businesses to go and do that is important. And that's why we've set out this plan, so they know where we're heading, they know where we're going, they know when we want to get there. They can plan around that. The Norwegian Prime Minister last night was making a similar point in how they're doing something quite similar to us. Knowing who's next and what's going to happen next, even if they won't know the precise timing of it, they can prepare for it. And I've got to say, the COVID-safe workplace and premises plans, training your staff and those things, very important. Very important, because when people come into your shop, they'll want to know that it's COVID-safe and that you've got that sorted. And I have no doubt businesses will be turning their minds to that.
One for you and one for Professor Murphy. Professor Murphy, after all this is over, are we going to see a change in that attitude of powering through your cold at work and employers requiring a sick certificate as well? And for you, Prime Minister, the JobKeeper payment's been undersubscribed, so why not spend some of that money on the arts, casual workers and migrant workers as well?
So I think we will see a permanent change in that sort of cavalier attitude of going to work when you've got a cold or a flu, and I think that will be even if COVID is gone, and we don't know whether it will be fully gone from society. That would help with flu seasons and help with general health in the community. So I think that one of the two permanent changes I can see forever is good quality hand hygiene and that stay at home if you're unwell mentality. And I think we've all been guilty of that at various times. I know I have, and we're all going to have to change that mentality.
JobKeeper is a demand-driven program. It doesn't have a target level of subscriptions at all, never has. Estimates were made at a time when things were very uncertain about where things are heading. The fact that fewer may ultimately seek or need that support is a good thing. And as a result, the program will continue to run on the parameters we set out for it, and it'll provide support to those that it's designed to assist. The Job Seeker program works in parallel with it. It's not JobKeeper or nothing. It's JobKeeper and Job Seeker. The two work together, and this is very important. The economic lifeline we have put together is there to spread right across the economy. And so the premise of the question is false. It's a demand-driven program, and it'll be delivered as it was designed. We've made some adjustments to it along the way that have largely dealt with administrative issues and clarification issues, and where that is needed, then we'll continue to do that. But at the end of the day, that lifeline of JobKeeper and Job Seeker has bought us the time to do exactly this plan. Very few countries in the world are in a position to stand here today and outline the plan that we are now embarking on, because they're in no position to do so. Australians have given myself, the Chief Medical Officer, the Premiers, Chief Ministers, you have given us the opportunity, Australia, to go forward with this plan. And now we will implement this plan together. And when that plan has been implemented, people will be back in work, people will be back together, and Australia will be stronger. Thank you very much.
OK, there's the Prime Minister Scott Morrison with the Chief Medical Officer following him after that comprehensive briefing, and really some decisions and announcements there in 3 stages that really do seriously affect the way our lifestyles go from here, and a return to some of what we were used to before. Listening in on this, of course, was our political editor Mark Riley in Canberra outside Parliament House, and we'll bring him in. Mark, 3 major stages, and I said too, life-changing. We'll go through each one of them comprehensively just to recap on what they are. But in a nutshell, stage 1, sit down, grab a latte at a cafe. Step 2, get back to the gym. Step 3, we can go to the bar and have a beer, at the very basic. But it involves a lot more than that. So let's go through stage 1.
Sure, I think we're looking forward to stage 3, aren't we? But anyway, that aside, look, a roadmap, as the Prime Minister called it. The first steps, he said, baby steps, gently opening up again in the economy and society, allowing up to 5 visitors to your home, gatherings of up to 10 outside. Work from home if that is what you and your employer agree to. Community centres like libraries, playgrounds, local playgrounds, boot camps again reopening for people for exercise. Return to the shopping for non-essential items, restaurants and cafes, but still with that 10-person limit. So only in a gentle way. Home sales and auctions in real estate. And so those other measures. It's really the Chief Medical Officer, Michael, Professor Brendan Murphy was saying this is the first step is crucial, because they'll be looking at the data to see whether there's any spike in infection by that gentle reopening. It will be done in different times by different states, depending on what the infection rates are like there now. So New South Wales and Victoria will probably move after the other states. Western Australia is almost there on all those elements. Northern Territory is. South Australia will move first, and Queensland will probably move to all those things in the ACT. So they'll be looking at that data over the ensuing 3 weeks before before thinking about the next stage.
All right, stage 1 also involved groups up to 10 people. Stage 2, Riles, is interesting. It moves up again, gatherings up to 20 outside of the home. Let's talk about stage 2.
Yeah, so having gauged the data on stage 1, that gentle reopening, now doubling the size of the gatherings outside to 20. Still working from home, but that opens up gyms again, beauty therapists, cinemas, theatres, amusement parks. So it's really getting back and socialising again. Galleries, museums, I guess the Parliament comes under that. Some interstate travel. The Prime Minister pointed out that interstate travel is still available at the moment. There are limited schedules, but he wants the states to start encouraging people more into that. So that's a more bold reopening, if you like, and that would be about a month after that first stage, all going well. The Prime Minister said that nothing's perfect. They are expecting there to be outbreaks in stages 1 and 2, and when there are those outbreaks, he and the Chief Medical Officer are confident that our health system can deal with them. So then we move to stage 3, which is the big one.
Yeah, let's look at that. I mean, there's a built-in review every 3 weeks too, as they said, in case any of those stages falter and or do well. I guess they could start advancing it. But stage 3 is the big one. All Australians return to work in groups up to 100.
Yeah, well, then this is the big one. So that's what you would call a COVID-safe economy, and that's what the Prime Minister's been describing it as. So gatherings of up to 100 people outside. So that's a return to all sport, considered travel over to New Zealand and the Pacific Islands, some international student travel. You heard the Prime Minister talk about possible charter flights to facilitate that. So food courts reopen, saunas and bathhouses, and this is a much broader reopening. At that point, crucially, Michael, the Prime Minister said he would hope that about 850,000 Australians would be back in their jobs, that would be the workplace reopening generally. And at the moment we've got 5 million people on JobKeeper allowance, 1.5 million on JobSeeker unemployed, more than half the labour force being supported by payments at the moment.
That's the big number, isn't it? Interestingly, the school's not written in there anywhere, but when questioned in the press conference, the PM did say that the schools are covered in stage 1, which is as of now. And on that point, all of this, there's a caveat to all of this, that it's still up to the states and territories. So Mother's Day this Sunday, for example, in some states, well, you might have the Victoria leader saying, well, I'm not going to announce anything till Monday. And I think the New South Wales Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, is suggesting the same.
Yeah, but it sounds like every other state, there will be, other than Tasmania, there will be an allowance for at least 5 people going into the family home, an additional 5 people and children. So, you know, gatherings, I guess, a bit above 10, certainly in Queensland. Anastasia Palaszczuk's announced that, Stephen Marshall in South Australia, and also Mark McGowan in Western Australia.
Comprehensive, Mark Riley. Thank you for that. A big announcement there from the Prime Minister. We'll come back to you in our 6 o'clock bulletins. Thank you for that. We'll have more details on all of this, of course, coming up in the Daily Edition next in our afternoon bulletins as well. And, of course, 7 News at 6 o'clock tonight. I'm Michael Usher. Thanks for your company this afternoon.
There's all